5 Ways Emperor Caligula Institutionalized Abuse in Ancient Rome Content Advisory. This episode deals with historical accounts of coercion, abuse, and violence under an autocratic regime. No graphic or explicit details are shown or described. The goal is educational, to examine the documented mechanics of power in ancient Rome and how a system can normalize the unacceptable. Viewer discretion is advised. There is a reason the most terrifying rooms in history didn't echo with screams, they echoed with instructions. Orders, protocols, schedules. While we picture a mad emperor acting on impulse, the dark truth whispered in Roman carters is far more chilling. The horror that haunted the Palatine Hill wasn't chaotic, it was organized. It had ledgers, it had tariffs, it had job descriptions, and, if ancient writers are to be believed, it had a manual. Tonight, we're opening a locked cabinet from Rome's past, one filled not with myths, but with mechanisms. 5 concrete ways, drawn from hostile sources and later historians, that Caligula allegedly transformed personal depravity into state policy. This isn't simply another crazy emperor story. It's the anatomy of a system. If you've ever wondered how power crosses the line from private vice to public governance and how the elite become complicit, stay with me. Because the most shocking part isn't the rumor, it's the routine. In the next few minutes, you'll hear why the early months of Caligula's reign looked like a golden age, how a sudden illness turned hope into dread, and how a charismatic ruler allegedly built a theater of humiliation with the precision of a tax office. And then, when the Praetorian Guard finally struck him down, why the paper trail, real or imagined, still haunted Rome. But before we decode those 5 mechanisms, here's a challenge. Listen for the pattern. If you can spot how each mechanism reinforces the next, you will understand not only Caligula but every system that ever tried to bureaucratize abuse. If you enjoy deep dives into dark history, ancient Rome, and how empires weaponize power, make sure you're subscribed. This is not a reenactment channel. This is an evidence-driven investigation. And at the end, I'll give you the exact sources you can read yourself: Suetonius, Cassius Dio, Philo, and what modern scholars say about propaganda, bias, and the machinery of the imperial court. Ready? Because the secret of Caligula's palace wasn't only what happened, it was how it was recorded. At first, Rome celebrated him like a savior. So how did the city that cheered his name end up whispering it like a curse? High, the rise, the turn, the setup when Gaius Caesar nicknamed Caligula the Little Boots. From the miniature soldier's footwear he wore in his father's camps took the throne in the year 37. Rome exhaled. He was the son of Germanicus, the golden general adored by the legions, and the grandson by adoption of Augustus's line. For a traumatized senate that had survived the paranoid twilight of Tiberius, Gaius looked like morning. He was young, educated, accessible. He cut taxes. He recalled the politically exiled. He staged lavish games and spectacles, invested in aqueducts and roads, and showered the military with goodwill. For 100 days, the empire felt like it had stepped into sunlight. Crowds left flowers where he walked. Children sang songs about the charming young emperor. Senators vied for his favor with visible relief. This is the Caligula people forget, the promised heir of a glorious dynasty. A ruler who dined in public, watched the games, walked among citizens with ease. It's important to remember this because the sharper the hope, the deeper the shock when hope collapses. Then, in the autumn of 37, according to ancient accounts, everything changed. An illness struck, fevers, delirium, convulsions that required multiple attendants to restrain him, visions in which he claimed to converse with Jupiter. Whether this was encephalitis, mental breakdown, poisoning, or simply rumor fueled by politics, we cannot verify. But what sources agree on is what followed. Gaius came back to the palace, and the light in Rome started to dim. The first signs were symbolic, theatrical orders to replace divine images with his likeness, to style rituals round his presence, to center the emperor as something more than a man. There were reports of insomnia, midnight wanderings through gardens, long one-sided conversations with statues and the moon. The court's servants, according to later writers, found him at dawn with soil on his skin, claiming to plant the future of Rome. This is where a typical story would fixate on scandal. But the more revealing story isn't about spectacle, it's about structure. If you want to understand a regime, don't start at the altar. Start at the paperwork attached to the altar. Part 2. The thesis. Not madness, but machinery here is the key insight that turns a lurid legend into a case study in power. The allegations against Caligula, as recorded by his enemies and by later historians, describe a transition from personal appetite to policy shape, from isolated acts to institutional. Think of a machine with 5 gears, ritual as control, rebranding worship and ceremony into instruments of coerced access to people's bodies, records as leverage, turning private life into files, files into pressure, pressure into obedience, money as gravity, monetizing submission under the euphemism of donations and honors, tying treasury to humiliation, theater as governance, staging obedience as public performance, so that the humiliation reverberates through the elite. Complicity is cement, binding fathers, husbands, guards, and clerks not only by fear, but by participation, so that everyone carries a share of silence. You will hear each in turn, and you will hear the feedback loop. Ritual creates data. Data creates leverage. Leverage extracts money. Money funds theater. Theater manufactures complicity. Complicity protects the ritual. Notice the loop and then ask yourself where you've seen similar loops in other times and places. Before we continue to critical notes on sources, we rely mainly on Suetonius, the 12 Caesars, Cassius Dio, Roman history, Josephus, and Philo of Alexandria, all of whom wrote with agendas and at some distance from events. Some claims are almost certainly exaggerated or shaped by posthumous hatred. We'll flag what's widely reported versus what's plausible versus what looks like political slander. The goal here is not to relish cruelty. It's to map the alleged mechanics without graphic detail. This is dark history for learning, not for sensationalism. How do you turn worship into a pipeline of control? By redefining what honor means and who owes it. Mechanism 1. Ritualized access. When honor becomes a policy, ancient Rome knew the power of ritual. The emperor's image, the imperial cult, the calendar of feasts and sacrifices, all of it forged loyalty. Caligula, according to hostile accounts, leaned hard into that power, blurring reverence for the office with submission to the person. He did not invent reverence, he weaponized it. The claim is simple and frightening. Under Gaius, religious language allegedly became the cover for coerced availability. Ceremonies round the emperor's presence, banquets, audiences, private rites took on a new tone. People from the highest strata of society were expected to attend and honor the emperor in ways that crossed boundaries. The euphemisms proliferated: divine service, offerings, duties. And with euphemism comes deniability. Nobody forces anyone. The fiction goes, these are offerings freely given. Except under autocracy, free can mean sign or suffer. Why start with ritual? Because ritual normalizes. It wraps power in sanctity. It reframes the unacceptable as sacred duty. If you persuade a society that coercion dressed in ceremony is piety, you are halfway to institutionalizing abuse. And we see the classic early warning signs in the sources: chairs of honor at banquets reassigned to favorite relatives, elite households drafted into imperial performances. The lines between wife, sister, priestess, and pawn blurred by rhetoric of divine closeness, the names that swirl round this first. Geir Drusilla, Agrippina the Younger, Julia la Villicomtoise. In a haze of allegation, rumor, and retrospective swear, Suetonius and Dio are specific about scandal but vague on structure. Yet even their bias helps us glimpse a machine, the emperor at the center, the elite orbiting him in formalized ceremonies where the expected honors exceed politics and invade the private sanctum of bodies and families. Ritual, crucially, creates a schedule. It creates rooms with roles. It creates a calendar of compliance. Think less of a single outrage and more of a timetable. Who attends, who sits where, who performs what duty, and who supervises. And with ceremony comes a staff, priests, attendants, scribes. Which leads to the next gear. A ceremony is only as powerful as the records it generates. What happens when every honor gets a file? Mechanism 2. The dossier state. Files, numbers, leverage the most chilling allegations about Caligula aren't the slanders, they're the spreadsheets. Multiple ancient writers speak of the emperor's fascination with documentation, lists, names, ledgers, receipts. Whether we're looking at truth or crafted image, the portrait is of a ruler who understood that what is written can be used, and what is numbered can be controlled. Imagine the registry reel or exaggerated by later pen stored in rooms beneath the palace on the Palatine. Names of nobles, their families, their ages, their status. Notes on attendance, on compliance, on hesitation. A file for each voluntary honor performed. Doctors and midwives drawn into the administrative web, not as healers, but as witnesses the state could cite. Clerks tallying gifts, guards recording who was present, secretaries drafting summaries that could be read out in the Senate to shame or to signal who was in line and who was on notice. Why keep such records? Because in an autocracy, information is leverage. It turns the private into the political. It transforms rumor into documentation. With a file in a drawer, a ruler can smile and say, "We have your signature. We have the witnesses. We have the note you wrote last year," even if the witnesses are employees. And the note was signed under duress. The mere existence of a paper trail can make resistance look like ingratitude or treason. This is where the machinery becomes self-funding. Once you track honors, you can invoice gifts. Once you invoice gifts, you can punish withholding, and once you punish withholding, every future gift looks cheaper than defense. We see versions of this in modern institutions, compliance forms, non-disclosure agreements, mandatory ceremonies. Ancient Rome had wax tablets and scrolls. We have PDFs. The technology changes, the logic does not. If the file is the threat, the bill is the leash. What happens when humiliation appears in the treasury as donations? Mechanism 3. Monetizing submission, the treasury as accomplice follow the money. Ancient sources accuse Caligula of raiding fortunes and inventing pretexts for confiscation. Many emperors did. But here the allegation grows more specific, honors round the imperial person. The very ceremonies we just described allegedly carried voluntary offerings attached. On paper, these were pious gifts to the ruler or the state. In practice, if you believe the sources, they were coercive tolls for participation in a system nobody dared refuse. This is the gravitational field of autocracy. The closer you orbit, the more you pay to stay alive. The emperor stages spectacle, and elite houses underwrite it. The emperor demands recognition, and elite houses donate to the Aurelium State Treasury or the Fiscus Imperial Treasury. The names change. The message does not. We even hear in later literature about sums tied to access fees disguised as honors framed as if patrons were grateful to contribute. And once you set a number, you create a market. Who pays most to please the emperor? Who bargains? Who resists and suddenly finds their tax inspectors more diligent, their estates audited, their sons denied promotion? This is the third gear turning. Humiliation becomes a line item. The fiction of voluntariness gives the palace legal cover. The account books start to look like ledgers of loyalty. And the more money flows, the more the system looks normal. Vendors appear to supply the ceremonies. Medics are on retainer. Clerks earn salaries to file the forms. The economy round the ruler thickens with jobs and contracts. Suddenly, ending the abuses would mean ending a lot of livelihoods. That is how a court becomes a black hole. It consumes outrage and excretes invoices. If money oils the gears, theatre keeps them spinning. What do you do when private compliance isn't enough? You perform it. Mechanism 4. Theatre of obedience. Humiliation as public governance tyrants have always understood the stage. But the most efficient stage is not the arena. It's the space where elites watch each other obey. Ancient writers paint the palace as an amphitheater of submission rituals and banquets where attendance was mandatory, where seating arrangements signaled rank, where a nod or a frown from the emperor could set the social weather for months. Why public? Because shame is social. Because seeing a rival humiliated teaches you your place. Because the father who keeps a straight face during a ceremony that violates his conscience becomes, in that moment, an instrument of the regime against his own household, and he knows it. Nothing binds a subject tighter than the knowledge that his own entrance is now part of the ruler's script. This is where the Praetorian Guard enters the narrative not just as bodyguards, but as stage managers. Ancient accounts accuse them of facilitating the emperor's excesses, enjoying privileges for their cooperation, and most importantly bearing witness. To be seen by armed men is to be reminded. To be escorted to a ceremony is to be told, "We know where you live." It is here that the difference between scandal and system becomes stark. Scandal is a rumor whispered. System is a ritual scheduled. Scandal is a vice, system is a job. And in a job, there are roles. The senator who fetches documents, the attendant who opens doors, the priest who recites, the clerk who writes, the guard who watches. Each carries a sliver of responsibility, thin enough to deny, heavy enough to bend the spine. But what holds a machine together isn't just grease and gears. It's glue. And in a system like this, the glue is complicity. Mechanism 5. Manufactured complicity. The empire of silence once you ritualize access, foul the details, monetize compliance, and stage obedience. One question remains. How do you make sure no one talks? The answer, in every dark chapter of history, is the same: you spread the burden. You make sure too many people have too much to lose if the truth is named in daylight. Under Caligula, according to hostile sources, senators weren't merely spectators. They became participants in their own subjugation. They passed honors, they applauded devotions, they signed papers. They funded ceremonies. Some did it to survive. Some did it to climb. A few, perhaps, believed the rhetoric. But all learned the same lesson. In a system built on coerced honor, you do not exhale without permission. This is where alleged laws and proclamations now lost enter the story. Writers speak of edicts that conflated the emperor's person with sacred status, of formulae that made proximity a ritual duty, of oaths that blurred moral lines. Whether these texts existed exactly as described or not, the effect is clear. Language did the laundering. What one century could call abuse, the next could call religion. And once something is called religion in an empire, it becomes dangerous to name it as anything else. If you want to imagine the suffocating feel of such a regime, imagine being a father caught between two fires, a ruler who demands public devotion and a conscience that screams no. Imagine a mother warned that resisting an honor might cost her family their estates or worse. Imagine a bureaucrat who knows the donations are coerced, but also knows his salary lines depend on them. Over months, the words people use to survive become the lies that trap them. That is manufactured complicity the cement poured into the cracks of fear. Curiosity hooked to the turning point. But machines are loud. And in the heart of the machine stood men with swords, the very men the emperor needed to keep him safe. The crack in the armor, the Praetorians' turn. If you've heard any version of Caligula's story, you know how it ends: assassination. The paradox is brutal. The god that enables a tyrant often executes him. Behind the euphemism security detail was a world of grudges. Ancient sources spotlight one man in particular, Cassius Sharia, a veteran Praetorian whom the emperor allegedly mocked, taunting his voice, his masculinity, and even making him use obscene passphrases.